Well, episode 7 in the books for Ahsoka. I didn't post anything before. My name is Brian, and I definitely didn't post anything before about Ahsoka because I find that a lot of times these new Star Wars series that go on, usually about halfway is when I start to get interested into it. It's like watching a movie and there's that boring part that goes on. Well, that's like the first, 4 or 5 basically episodes of it. But I will say Ahsoka's getting better to me. Is it Mandalorian? No. Okay, Mandalorian was a masterpiece. I find Mandalorian to be a masterpiece because the way that they just got lucky with matching Grogu with Din Djarin and the Mandalorians, which were a very popular character in the 1980s from Boba Fett, I think it does some great justice. But Ahsoka, I don't know much about. I'm not a big cartoon fan. I find that a lot of times these cartoons get pretty boring. I grew up on the Saturday morning cartoons, guys. I grew up with, watching Looney Tunes on the weekend and Ghostbusters, things to which, were funny, comedy, and then growing through life watching The Simpsons and Family Guy and American Dad and, Futurama and American Aqua Teen Hunger Force, things like that. I find that cartoons should be funny. That's what I'm looking for, is a comedy. So it's hard for me to watch a sci-fi. Not to say that the storylines are any good, but I'm not a big comic book type person. I did grow up in the 1970s and 80s, so obviously my favorite film is going to be Return of the Jedi because it was, 1983. It was the first film I was able to go to the theaters. I was born in 76, so I didn't go to, New Hope and Empire Strikes Back in the theaters at that time. But I find that this show is great. I think it's getting better. It definitely had a very slow start, but I think it's so far better than Andor or Obi-Wan. I think that I find that the bad villains that they have there are fantastic. Ray Stevenson, God rest his soul, I think he did a great job. I'm really going to miss him, seeing him on the screen, because I think he did a wonderful job. I find that, Rosario Dawson does a wonderful job. I loved her in Clerks 2 and Men in Black. I think she's doing a fantastic job with the character. Not so much on the Natasha Bordizzo character. Mostly, I have nothing against the actress by any means, but I find that the character is probably one of the worst Mandalorians possible and one of the worst Jedi possible, all in the same character. Someone who gives up an entire galaxy, it risks it just so that way she can go see her friend again. And anyone who's been in the military knows that that's something which you would not do. But Star Wars and most of these films these days don't really follow military rule, as you generally have, someone like Mary, what's her name, Winstead, playing a general when she's probably, 35 years old. Yeah, that doesn't really happen these days. But either way, I find that the characters are great in this. I think that the storyline is getting better. They are going to need to introduce some, new characters. Bringing Anakin Skywalker is like bringing Jar Jar Binks back. That's not a very exciting role for most of us. But seeing C-3PO and including Leia, that's going to be great. Obviously, we want to see Luke. After Mandalorian Season 2 ending, it's going to be hard to beat that. But I think that Ahsoka's getting better. I just hope to kind of see Jedi actually fighting back and being cool again. I find that, a lot of the newer episodes, except for Mandalorian, anyone in Mandalorian, they made the Jedi. Ahsoka was really powerful in Mandalorian. And then it kind of started out weak. But it's kind of good to see it come back. And I think that the series is going to get a little bit better. We're curious to see who's going to be the guest appearances, obviously, in Episode 8. It was nice to see the villains. I mean, Grand Marshal Thrawn was a great job. I will say he reminds me a lot of times of Grand Moff Tarkin and in the original Star Wars. And you see that kind of like a cool bad guy type, person. And not knowing much again about the cartoons or the comics, but I find it as a very cool villain to kind of see, and I think that everyone else has done a pretty good job with it within the villains. So I am excited for Episode 8. We'll see what happens. As I said, I think Ahsoka is a little bit better than what I have seen in the past, And I do love the character again. So let's see what episode 8 brings us. And for those who are Gen X and those who are not Gen X, I'm not saying that anything bad about any other generation. It's just we grew up understanding, and a lot of those in Gen X will understand as we grew up seeing the Jedi being our heroes. And it's kind of hard for us to see them not be that strong and not be that hero. You know, like in the movies, seeing Luke sucking blue milk on the side of a mountain wasn't exactly what we remembered from Return of the Jedi in the 80s. So I think that we're curious to see what happens, and I'm looking forward to it. So, all right, stay tuned. I'll bring you more.